was at a convention and walking down the hallway with a colleague, we hopped onto a crowded elevator chattering away a mile a minute, when suddenly from the back of the elevator someone yelled, "I know that voice." It was a college friend that I had not seen in 20 years. Imagine the treat of running into an old friend. Now, you may forget my face. You may forget my name. My hair has a strange way of changing colors. But when I open my mouth, you somehow will recognize my voice. I just seem to have one of those voices. There was a time in my life when I heard voices. That's a hard thing to admit, I know, but I want to tell you about that time in my life. And I have to tell you that it was a sad time in my life. You see, I was in the hospital giving birth to my second child when suddenly the personality of the doctor changed. The doctor who had been cracking jokes suddenly started barking orders. The change in my doctor was so dramatic that I looked at him and said, "Is something wrong?" And he responded, "I fear your baby is hydrocephalic." My husband said, "What's that?" And I yelled, "That's water on the brain." And I began then to shout, "Put me out, put me out." The doctor wouldn't proceed without a second opinion, and he shouted no to every doctor the nurses suggested. Then very spontaneously, he walked to the hallway and opened the door and shouted, "There's Dr. Brown, come here." As Dr. Brown walked through the doorway of my delivery room, my husband and I recognized him instantly as the husband of my Bible study fellowship leader. 2 weeks earlier, she had shared how his life had changed since he started a prayer closet. And that morning, he walked from his prayer closet to be the answer to my prayer in that delivery room. He confirmed the diagnosis, assisted with delivery, and of course they did put me out. But before I came to, an entire Bible study was praying for me. As I began to come out from under the anesthetic, I heard the voices. I heard the voice of my favorite aunt and adopted mom saying, "God has not promised skies always blue." And then I heard my grandma, who raised me, say, "All things work together for good." And then I heard my father-in-law say, "You know, my mommy always told me." And then the voice changed, and it was his mother's voice I heard. "Sonny, His grace is sufficient." Well, the news was not good with our baby. The news was horrible. I was faced with an absolute nightmare of words. Suddenly, brain damaged, vegetable. In fact, they said, "He'll be a vegetable all his life, forget you ever had him," as if that were possible, and have another. And then they would say, anything is possible. He could be a normal child. So we lived on a yo-yo for 4.5 months. 4.5 months, 5 major brain surgeries. And then the day came when I sat in a hospital room before my son's final surgery, knowing in my heart that I was holding him for the last time on earth. The strange thing is that I sat in perfect peace. I knew that as I was holding him, the arms of God were holding me. I knew that it would be okay. Well, he did make it through the surgery, but he didn't last very much longer. And within 1 month of burying my baby, my husband, whom I adored, hit the bars and never ever came home. So within just a short period of time, I found myself not just the mother of the handicapped, but the mother of the deceased, and a single parent to an only child, and divorce was a word I couldn't even say. My life literally fell to pieces. And I went through a period of time where I wondered where God was. In fact, walking through the 4.5 months of Justin's lifetime was a time when God answered prayer before I even knew to ask it. And walking through the months that followed his death was a time when God was silent, and I wondered if he even loved me anymore. Now, the good news is that I did make it through that horrible time, but I want to caution at a time like this, because it seems to me that those who raised me in the faith taught me that if I just trusted, it would all be okay. They forgot to tell me how hard it was to walk through that valley. They forgot to tell me that tears and pain and new beginnings and new dreams would be the price I would have to pay. In fact, when I wrote my first book, Just in Heaven's Baby, it took me exactly 9 months to write that book, and I felt as though I had birthed him all over again. But the process of writing that book and crying a mountain of tears and putting one foot in front of the other and doing the new beginnings transformed Justin from my tragedy on earth to my treasure in heaven. Someday there will be a reunion, and when I stumble, I can just envision a little boy in heaven saying, "Get up, Mom, try again, you can do it." The process of writing my book, Surviving Separation and Divorce, and crying another mountain of tears, transformed me from the victim of my circumstances to the overcomer. Now I want to go back to those voices and say, as I began to recover, I had a little talk with God about that. And I said to God, "God, why wasn't it your voice that I heard in my hour of need?" And you know what God had to say about that? It was. You see, I have been blessed with a Christian heritage. Those who love me, those who formed me, those who shaped me in the image of God. They taught me about faith. They taught me about hope. They taught me about second chances and new beginnings. I heard God's voice through them. In the Message version of Psalm 119, the last few verses, King David says to God, "God, when I stray, call me. I'll recognize your voice." So I have 2 questions for you. One is, do you recognize the voice of God when he speaks to you? Sometimes it comes as the peace that passeth understanding, like it did as I sat in that hospital room. Sometimes it comes as the voice of those you love, as it came back to me in my hour of need. The second question I have for you this morning is perhaps more important. When those you love face their hour of need, and they hear the voice of Jesus, does Jesus sound like you?